Wabash graduates, according to the admissions brochures, go on to prominent graduate schools, to pre-professional training, to important posts in business. This year, instead, a large number go on to be drafted into the Army. Of those, many will serve in Vietnam. Some will be wounded. Perhaps a few will die. It's hard to figure out the exact percentages in advance, but 7 Wabash men have already died in this war. And it's certain that of those who go into the Army, whether killed, wounded, or eventually discharged unhurt, the vast majority are going to be spending much of the next 2 years learning not how to be businessmen, lawyers, teachers, or researchers, not how to begin their families, but how to shoot a gun, how to drive a bayonet into somebody's stomach, how to kill. And somehow today, all the traditional phrases about the glorious opportunities that await us as college graduates ring pretty hollow. I didn't want to talk about the war today. You're tired of hearing about it, and I'm tired of thinking about it. But this is where we are. This is what's going to happen to so many of my friends, the young men graduating today with me. And I found I just couldn't be honest with you or with myself and talk about anything else. I'm not a political scientist or a military expert. I can't lecture you on the complexities of the present situation. But maybe I can describe to you the experience of a college senior graduating in the 16th year of American involvement in Vietnam. And maybe something of that experience will have some meaning for you. In 1955, when most of us who are graduating today were in the 2nd grade, Secretary of the Army Bricker assured the American people that within a year or two, the communist threat in Vietnam would be ended. There'd be no more need for American assistance in that country. In 1963, when we were sophomores in high school, Secretary of Defense McNamara said that American advisors in Vietnam would be home by Christmas. A year after that, Lyndon Johnson was elected to the presidency on the promise that American boys would not have to fight in a war for Asians. 4 years after that, Richard Nixon was elected to the presidency on a promise to end the war in Vietnam. And a year and a half after that, the first American troops were killed in Cambodia. Can we be blamed for growing suspicious about what our government tells us about Vietnam? We're promised a rapid American withdrawal, but we've been hearing promises like that literally most of our lives. We're told that Americans are fighting for the right of the Vietnamese to choose their own government. But we read Dwight Eisenhower's admission that if the United States had not prevented free elections in 1955, Ho Chi Minh would have won an overwhelming victory. We're told we fight for the American way of life, for freedom. But when we see black men oppressed in the ghettos, when we see those who exercise their constitutional right to peaceful protest called bums, or shot down on college campuses not that different from this one, we find it hard to see the Viet Cong as the greatest threat to American freedom. We are told that those Viet Cong who have not been defeated by all of America's military might are somehow going to be beaten by a South Vietnamese army which is yet to show any real eagerness to fight when the chips were down. And we wonder if Vietnamization isn't another word for political expedience, when it becomes easier for a president to yet let young men go on dying than to admit that his policy has failed. I do not ask that all of you share this viewpoint. but I ask that you try to understand the experience that's behind it. I may be wrong, but surely it's possible to be honestly wrong. Surely it's possible to be patriotic and hate what's happening to the country you love. Possible to oppose a war not out of communism or anarchism, but because it's killing your friends to no good purpose. In 1907, Ezra Pound came to Wabash College to teach English. Lived in a house over there on Grant Street. And a few years later, after World War I, he wrote some lines peculiarly appropriate for the class of 1970. These fought in any case, and some believing. Pro domo, in any case. Some quick to arm, some for adventure, some from fear of weakness, some from fear of censure, some for love of slaughter in imagination, learning later, some in fear, learning love of slaughter. Died some, pro patria, non dulce, non et decor. Walked eye deep in hell, believing old men's lies. Then, unbelieving, came home, home to a lie, home to many deceits, home to old lies and new infamy, usury age-old and age-thick, and liars in public places. To all this there are no easy answers, and I do not propose to insult you by offering any. Yet I do not want to dwell only on a note of despair. Had this speech been given 10 years ago, I could have been very fashionable and tried to depress all of you. That was a time when many college students liked to attack the apparent self-satisfaction of their society and speak at great length of alienation and existential anguish. Well, time has proved true enough their suspicion that all was not well. But today, in the midst of war, with cities and campuses alike erupting in violence and mankind apparently fated in the end to sink under the mass of its own garbage, it surely takes no particular insight to be depressed. And so it may prove worthwhile to look for reasons for hope. Let me offer you then 3 fragments to shore up the ruins of the times. First is from Albert Camus' novel The Plague, in which a doctor recounts the grim struggles of his city when swept with an epidemic of the bubonic plague. And at the end explains that he has written this to state quite simply what we learn in a time of pestilence, that there are more things to admire in men than to despise. It's hard not to think of this as a time of pestilence for our country, but perhaps we can begin to learn the same lesson. We began to learn it, I think, at Wabash, the week after Kent State, when we found that our college president was more courageous, our faculty more receptive, our students more concerned than most of us had quite expected. The years ahead are going to be difficult, and it may be beyond the capacity of any of the people around us to solve any of the real problems. But wherever we go, some people will try to help us. Some people will care about what happens to the world. Some people will show their love in the way they live. And maybe we can learn, in a time of pestilence, that there are more things to admire in men than to despise. The second lines come from a poem W.H. Auden wrote when Sigmund Freud died. Of those like Freud who battle the demons that beset men, he wrote, "For every day they die among us, those who were doing us some good and knew it was never enough, but hoped to improve a little by living." This is a time when it's hard to be both honest with yourself and proud of yourself. A few brave soldiers hate to kill but are willing to die. A few go to jail for their principles. Most of us sell out somewhere in between. And if my birth date makes me safe from the draft so I don't want to cause trouble and take any risks, who am I to judge anybody else? Well, most of us aren't heroes. We already knew that. But these are challenging times. And even ordinary men sometimes respond to challenges. In the years ahead, in the Army, on the campus, in the corporation, many of us may, for reasons we'll never quite understand, act more bravely or speak out more honestly than we quite intended. We may do some good and know it will never be enough, but hope to improve a little by living. My third beacon of hope is a movie called Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Two very appealing outlaws are constantly threatened by pursuers and shot to death in the last scene. Yet though everybody sympathizes with them, the film's hilariously funny and nobody leaves the theater depressed. I suspect that's because while the heroes or anti-heroes or whatever they may be are surely among life's losers and end up shot, we can't help feeling they had a hell of a lot of fun along the way. There's a feeling around that if one can't actually do anything about Vietnam or racism or pollution, one can at least have the decency to be miserably unhappy. I think that's stupid. A real concern for these problems makes us want to seize the joy that remains in the world. Whether it's the joy of a summer hike and turkey run, the joy of being with someone we love, the joy of creative accomplishment. All this is good. It's a good that all the evil in the world can't destroy. And it's a strange attitude indeed that makes us want to destroy in the name of good and do what evil could never accomplish. I said I would offer no easy answers, and I trust I've kept that promise. The class of 1970 does not enter a world full of nothing but glorious opportunities. But perhaps we'll learn that there are more things to admire in men than to despise. Perhaps, knowing it will never be enough to change the world, we will act more honorably than we expected we would. Perhaps we'll have a lot of fun along the way. It wouldn't be a bad life.